Welcome back, guys, to the Ashes to Awakening podcast with your host, Christian Huskins. I feel so incredibly blessed to have you here listening to me today. Whether you're listening to me in the car while driving, getting ready for bed, making dinner for the kiddos, maybe you're listening to me at work, or just simply taking a time out. We need that sometimes. I'm grateful that you are here. I know that the last couple months has been pretty challenging for a lot of us, me included. Had some seasons over the last couple weeks. So I do want to start this episode off with a quick nervous system breathing exercise. And this is going to help recenter your nervous system. Your nervous system, unfortunately, will not fully allow you to receive the information that you're hearing today if you are in survival mode. Most of you don't even know that you're in survival mode because that's just how you operate. So you can continue doing these breath counts as we go through the material or just through your life. But I just want to walk you through one so that you know how to do it. So we're going to start with taking a nice deep breath into the count of 5, holding it for the count of 4, and exhaling for the count of 7. Just really gently, but really blowing it all out, letting it all go, releasing any tension, stress, anxiety, fear, whatever just might be weighing on you. You may not even know what it is. It might just be a heaviness sitting in your chest, your tummy, your shoulders. Whatever that looks like or feels like to you, just letting it go. It serves no purpose for what we're doing here today. Today, I also want to invite you to set an intention, allowing yourself and giving yourself permission to just be today. Be present, be still, be intentional, be open, with no judgment, no criticism, no shame or blame. I know sometimes when we're listening to these podcasts, workshops, we're taking classes or listening to lives, that we're being given information. And we instantly stop and attach blame to our story. We start searching for the blame. And when we do that, we tune out what is being said to us because it's easier to attach blame. So if you feel yourself doing that today, or maybe you're even feeling some resistance of wanting to turn this off, maybe it's, oh, this is too much, I got to turn it off, right? I invite you to insert the pause. Insert the pause and stay with me in this present moment. Allow yourself to just be open to the awareness. Take what lands and leave the rest behind. So if you haven't already done so, grab that notebook, some paper, something to write with, because you're probably going to want to reflect back on today's conversation. There might be parts that don't resonate with you right at this moment, but maybe in a week or a month, you might want to revisit this conversation, okay? Because today is probably the most important lesson I am ever going to teach you. Out of everything that we'll talk about throughout any of my podcast episodes, whether it be us talking about trauma, relationships, childhood wounds, attachment styles, boundaries, abandonment, the nervous system, parts work, or just healing in general. There is one lesson that I believe has the power to change how you experience every single one of those topics. And guess what? It's not a technique. It's not an exercise. It's not even a coaching tool. It's something that you have the power over every day. And that is your mindset. The willingness to keep an open mind. Not because someone tells you to believe what they believe, okay? There are so many people out there that will talk until they are blue in the face to try to get you to agree with them. And then if you don't agree, they get angry, they shut down. But the truth of the matter is, growth becomes impossible when we believe that we've seen the whole picture So many of us operate in a place of my story tells my truth. Okay. So today I want to just ask you to keep an open mind for just a little bit. Stay with me, because one of my favorite quotes that I use with my clients, my kids, and even myself, I have to put myself in check sometimes, is that the mind is like a parachute. Okay. It only works when it's open. So remember that. Remember the next time you're talking to someone and they're talking about something that maybe you haven't experienced, and you start to shut down and want to attach your side of the story to it. Just remind yourself that the mind is like a parachute. It only works when it's open. And I have found this to be incredibly true, not just in my learnings, my education, but also in my healing. It's funny because when I was going through my education, right, and I was in class, we had some people that were in class that might have had some surface level education somewhere else. And it was very hard for my instructor to teach them something new because they only came in with the thought process of, this is my truth. And I found that when I was also working in corporate America, I was a root cause analyst and I was pretty good at what I did. So when we got new people, I was asked to train them. And many of them came from different banks. And they were doing the same exact job, just at a different bank. And when I was trying to coach them and teach them, it was almost impossible because they were so stuck in their way that this was the right way because this is how they did it at the other bank. Instead of coming in with an open mind and learning how this bank did it. So like I said, I have found this incredibly true in all areas of my life. And we often become so trapped in our stories because we have repeated them for so long. Okay. We've unfortunately mistaken them for our truth. So today I want to show you the why in our episode. And it's called The Lens That You See the World Through. Why keeping an open mind can change everything. So I truly believe that this is one of the most important concepts that we will ever talk about and that I will ever teach you. Before we can understand why we think the way we do, why we react the way that we do, okay, many times we'll say, no, I'm not going to react, I'm going to respond. And then we find ourselves in that moment being triggered and we react. So in order to understand why we do this, why we choose the relationships we choose, why we continue repeating the same patterns that we do, we have to first understand something incredibly important. And that is, we don't experience life as it is. We experience life through the lens that we've developed from our own experiences. And until we become aware of that lens, we'll continue believing that our perspective is the only perspective. So I want to do a really quick exercise with you. When I was in one of my classes, the instructor did this with us and called on two different individuals, and it was really amazing what came out of it. So I know we're not like actually talking, so I'm going to lean on you to put your answers in the comments, but I want to do this exercise with you. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a word, and as soon as I say the word, 2 seconds later, I'm going to tell you to stop thinking about anything that's coming up. But in that moment between the word and me saying stop, I want you to write down everything that comes up for you in all of your senses. What did you hear, see, feel, taste? What did you imagine? What did you picture? And if you don't want to write it down, that's okay too. You can just keep it in the forefront of your mind. I do not want you to overthink. This is not a test. You cannot get this right or wrong. Okay? So the word that I'm giving you is rain. Now stop. Stop thinking about it. What came up for you? Write it down or bring it to the forefront. What did you see? What did you hear? What did you feel? Many of you may have pictured things like sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket with a warm cup of coffee or cocoa, and listening to the rain hit the windows. And you thought, wow, this is really peaceful. There's fresh air. You really love that fresh smell after a storm. Maybe the rain makes you think of life and growth and new beginnings. And some of you may have heard that same exact word and immediately thought traffic, flooding, mud, canceled plans. Maybe they remember being stranded in a storm and being very frightened. Maybe rain reminds them of losing a loved one. Maybe it reminds them of the day that everything changed. Same word, completely different experience. Now let's try another one. The word is love. And stop. What came up for you? Write it all down, bring it to the forefront. Let's talk about it. Some of you might have felt that love is warm, love is safe, comforting. You might have visualized being hugged, quality time, laughing in the car during family vacations on car rides, laughing around the dinner table, playing cards, or just someone who showed up for you. But for some of you, the word love might create something completely different. Love might have meant earning approval, walking on eggshells, not feeling good enough. Maybe love came with a sharp tongue that was filled with criticism, belittling, judgment. Maybe you were met with conditions, conditional love, groundation, control, fear, or maybe love just simply meant having to survive. Again, same word, completely different experience. So let me ask you, who's right? The person who sees rain as peaceful, the person who sees rain as frightening, the person who experiences love as safety, the person who experiences love as pain. The answer is, guys, neither are wrong. They simply are viewing the world through a different experience, through different memories, different emotions, different stories. And that's exactly how our mind works. So, like I said, drop it in the comments what came up for you. When I said the word rain, what came up for you? And when I said the word love, what came up for you? I'd love to know. Okay? So, your mind is always looking through a lens. Every experience that you've had, every relationship, disappointment, success, heartbreak, betrayal, encouragement, every moment that you felt seen, every moment that you felt invisible, has quietly become another layer on the lens through which you now see the world. Okay? Most of us don't even realize that we're wearing that lens. We simply assume this is just reality. But what if it's not? What if what feels absolutely true for you is actually being filtered through experiences that you never chose or that you never walked through? What if your mind has been protecting you by filtering situations through yesterday's experiences instead of today's reality? It's like me wearing sunglasses. I'm outside for hours. I'm walking around with my friend, and I'm wearing these dark sunglasses, okay? I forget I'm wearing sunglasses because I've been outside for so long, and the friend I'm with isn't wearing sunglasses at all. And we walk into a building, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so dark in here. And my friend is like, no, it's not. Maybe someone else around me is like, no, it's not. And then what happens? It becomes conflict. You begin arguing. You begin trying to convince your friend that it is dark and they're crazy, right? The arguing begins with, yes, it is. It's dark in here. And they're like, no, it's not. But the situation is, I have sunglasses on. So I am looking through a darker lens. So to everyone else, the situation is the same. The building is the same. What's inside the building is the same. The lights, that are on are all the same. I just see it differently because I'm wearing dark sunglasses that I forgot I was wearing. And so this is where so many misunderstandings start happening. This is where so much conflict starts in relationships specifically. Okay? Not because people are intentionally trying to misunderstand one another, but because every single one of us is seeing the world through a different lens. The world on the other side of the lens is all the same, but I am seeing it through a darker lens because I'm wearing sunglasses and my friend is not. So they're seeing more color, more brightness. Most people spend their entire lives trying to convince other people that their lens is the correct one, instead of becoming curious about why someone else's lens looks different. And that is why keeping an open mind is so incredibly powerful, because an open mind isn't about everyone agreeing. It's about recognizing that your perspective is shaped by your experience, while others are shaped by theirs. And I'll tell you right now, in my house, I have lived a much, much different life, much different childhood, have had different previous relationship experiences, things that have happened in my life, things that I've experienced that my husband never has. And we have some different viewpoints on some things. There are a couple things in our house that we just don't agree on. We have talked about them. We have sat down. I've heard his reasoning. He's heard mine. I've talked through my life experience. He's talked about his. And in no way, shape, or form in this conversation am I trying to change his perspective. And he's not trying to change mine. I am open. I have an open mind. I am open to understanding his perspective. And he is open to hearing mine. But unfortunately, he has the inability to see things through my lens. Okay? Because he's never had my sunglasses on. So we have talked about these things, and outside of that, we just don't talk about it because we're never going to sway each other one way or the other. And it's not about that. I do hope that maybe one day he allows himself to put on my sunglasses to see things through my perspective, but he has to be the one to do that. I'm not going to not marry my husband because we don't agree on some things. We agree to disagree, and we respectfully see each other's perspective, and we move forward. And that is what being open-minded is about. There's a lot of individuals out there who aren't friends, aren't married, aren't in relationships, families that are broken because they don't see the same perspective on things like religion, politics, racial encounters, the LGBTQ community, raising children, maybe in two separate houses. Maybe you have some co-parenting stuff going on, menopause, and 900 other things that it could be. So you could be really losing out on an amazing person because both of you are closed-minded. Because you're trying so hard to get each other to agree on one thing. But the only way that this works, just like in my marriage, you have to hear each other, see each other's point of view, but at the end of the day, you don't have to agree. You just have to be respectful, and you can respectfully disagree and still be loving and respecting to each other and each other's viewpoints. Everyone is going to see things from their point of view because their perspective is shaped by their own experience, just like yours is. just like mine is. And when you begin living from this understanding, everything starts to change. The way you communicate changes. Just like my husband and I, we communicate from a very healthy place. The way you parent changes. The way you love changes. The way you resolve conflict changes. Even the way that you see yourself begins to change. Because awareness always comes before transformation. Have you ever noticed that two people can witness the same exact event and walk away telling two completely different stories? One person thinks they ignored me. The other person thinks they probably didn't see me. One person hears feedback and thinks they're trying to help me grow, and I really appreciate that. Another person hears the same feedback and thinks they're criticizing me. I did something wrong. I'm not good enough. Think about relationships. If you ask your husband or your wife, I'm going to use husband in this incident because I have a husband. So you ask your husband that when he gets home to call you or to text you, but he doesn't. He forgets. Or maybe something else happened, okay? But if your lens says people forget sometimes, maybe a neighbor walked up to him when he was walking in the house and distracted him. Maybe he came into the kids needing something, or the animals got into something and tore up a pillow. Maybe he had to use the restroom. But if your lens says people forget sometimes, you're probably going to move on and forgive a whole lot faster. And honestly, it probably isn't going to be that big of a deal anyways. But if your lens says people never show up for me, people ignore me, I'm invisible to people, your nervous system is going to immediately sound the alarm of danger. You will have a very different reaction. You're going to have a very hard time releasing the attachment to the hurt in order to forgive and hear their side of the story. The event itself didn't create the pain. The meaning attached to the event did. Growth changes what you see. So I want to share something that I think every single one of us has experienced at some point in time in our life. Think of a book. Think of a book that you have read more than one time. The words never change. The characters don't change. The ending doesn't change. Or think about a movie that you've watched multiple times. I can tell you right now, I've watched Forrest Gump a handful of times. I've watched Billy Madison a handful of times. Cool Runnings a handful of times. There are probably 5 or 7 movies that I have watched several times. And I use this example because of my own awareness. So the storyline in this movie or in this book doesn't change. The characters don't change. The ending doesn't change. But somehow you notice something that you never did the last time you watched it or read it. Maybe a conversation suddenly had a different meaning. It landed a little bit different. It made you go, I never heard it like that before. Maybe a character's behavior started to make more sense. Maybe you picked up on details that you completely missed the very first time or the second time or even the third time that you watched it or read it. Maybe you even found yourself relating to a completely different character than you did before. Why? Because the book didn't change. The movie didn't change. But your experience changed. Your perspective changed. Your awareness changed. Growth has a way of bringing old lessons back to new light. Sometimes the greatest lesson isn't found in something new. It's found in revisiting something familiar with a different lens. And that's exactly why I encourage you to keep an open mind as we move through my podcast episodes together. There may be some concepts that you've heard before, or ideas that you've read in a book, or lessons that you've heard from another coach or therapist or pastor, teacher, mentor. You may even catch yourself thinking, I've heard this before. I'm just going to turn it off. But here's what I'd like you to consider. Maybe today you're finally ready to hear it differently. Not because the message changed, but because your lens changed. Maybe you've lived through some experiences that you hadn't lived through before. Maybe you've learned things that you didn't know before. Maybe you've healed parts of yourself that weren't healed before. And because you have an open mind, your lens changed. That's why I begin every episode by saying, take what lands and leave the rest behind. Because not everything is meant to land today. Some lessons will make perfect sense immediately, while others may not resonate at all. And that's okay. 6 months from now, a year from now, a week from now, or after another life experience, you may come back to this exact episode and hear my exact words and suddenly think, wow, I don't remember hearing that the first time. My words didn't change. Your awareness did. So as you listen to every episode throughout my podcast, please don't close your mind and say, I've heard this before. I'm turning it off. I don't need to hear it again. Instead, ask, what might I be ready to hear today that I wasn't ready to hear before? What may Coach Christian say in a specific way that I will be able to resonate with that maybe I didn't when other people said it? Okay, that one question can completely change the way that you learn, that you grow, and that you heal. So, one of the biggest obstacles for everything in life, but specifically healing, is certainty. Not confidence, not conviction, certainty. The belief that I already know this. I've already heard this. This is not going to happen to me. This doesn't apply to my life. Because the moment we become certain, we stop becoming curious. And curiosity is where growth begins. I've learned something through coaching individuals, and that is the clients of mine who grow and heal the fastest aren't ones that know the most. They're the ones who stay teachable and coachable. They're willing to ask questions. They're willing to allow me to ask questions without resistance. They're willing to challenge old beliefs. They're willing to step into something uncomfortable because it's unfamiliar, but they work through it anyway. They're willing to say, maybe I've been looking at this differently than I thought. Maybe there's another way to look at this. And that takes courage because questioning your perspective can feel uncomfortable. If your lens has protected you for 20, 30, 50, 70 years, your mind isn't going to give it up easily. Remember, your mind isn't trying to keep you happy. Your mind is trying to keep you safe. So if your experiences taught you that people are not trustworthy, your mind will keep looking for evidence that confirms that and keep putting those type of people in your life that you can't trust. If your experiences taught you that your needs don't matter, your mind will keep noticing situations that reinforce that belief. If your experiences taught you that conflict isn't safe, you avoid conflict. You're going to avoid those difficult conversations, even if they are healthy. Not because those things are objectively true, but because your mind has learned to expect them. Our minds are constantly filtering information, not to show us everything. We delete a lot of things that are not important to us. I don't know how many times I've drove past the post office and didn't know that the post office was where it was. And I mean, it's loud and clear. And my husband's like, "You've never noticed this before?" But it wasn't important. It's not something that I was expecting or I was looking for. So my mind said, this isn't important. We can delete this message unit. Okay. So it's filtering information all day long. And it's going to show us what we are looking for. Think about buying a new vehicle. Maybe you've never really noticed this particular make or model on the road before. You want to buy a white Chevy truck and you really don't notice them. But the moment that you think about buying one or that you actually buy one, you now start seeing them everywhere on commercials, on billboards, all over the road. Did everyone just start suddenly buying the same vehicle? Of course not. It's always been there. Your mind just simply wasn't paying attention to it. It deleted that message unit, okay? The same thing happens in our beliefs. Whatever we've learned to expect, we become incredibly good at finding. Words have power. And often, unfortunately, we don't even realize that we're doing it, which is why awareness is so powerful. If you wake up in the morning and say, "Man, I really suck at relationships," guess what? Your mind is going to continue showing you how bad you are at relationships. Awareness allows you to pause and ask, am I really seeing reality? Or am I seeing my interpretation of reality? Because healing doesn't begin by changing your circumstances. Sometimes healing begins by becoming aware of the lens through which you have been viewing your circumstances all along. I want to take you one step further because everything that we've talked about so far has been about understanding ourselves. But the lesson doesn't just stop with you. It extends to every relationship that you'll ever have. Your marriage, your boyfriend, girlfriend, boyfriend, boyfriend, your family, your children, your relationships with coworkers, friendships, even complete strangers. Because here's what I've learned after working with clients is that we don't just misunderstand ourselves. We often, more than likely, misunderstand each other. Not because we're bad people. Not because we're intentionally trying to hurt one another. Have you ever known a person that's a good person with a bad behavior, but they changed that behavior? That behavior didn't make them a bad person. So what's happening here is that we are constantly interpreting other people's words, behaviors, and reactions through the lens of our own experience. Imagine for a moment that you grew up in a family and in the home, conflict was healthy. Your parents disagreed respectfully, like my husband and I do. They talk through problems. They apologize. They repair. Conflict wasn't something to fear. Now imagine someone who grew up in a family home where conflict was screaming, slamming doors, walking on eggshells, emotional or physical abuse, just absolute chaos. So when these two people get into a relationship and have a disagreement, one individual may see an opportunity to solve a problem, and that person probably came from the healthy home of conflict. The other person's nervous system might signal danger right away. And that person most likely grew up with the screaming and the chaos. Same conversation, completely different experience. Neither person is intentionally creating that difference. The lenses. One of the greatest mistakes we make in relationships is assuming everyone sees the world the way that we do. We say things like, I don't know why they're making such a big deal about this. Well, why can't they just let this go? They're being so emotional. They're overreacting. That wouldn't bother me. But have you stopped to ask yourself, would it bother me if I had lived their life instead of mine? And that is a very different question, because the truth is, if I had your exact childhood, your exact experiences, your exact relationships, your heartbreaks, your exact fears, disappointments, I might see the world exactly the way that you do. And if you had lived my life, you might see the world exactly the way that I do. This goes back to my husband and I in our marriage. And this realization, I will tell you, will humble you. It reminds us that our perspective isn't the only perspective. So I want to revisit curiosity for just a moment. And this is my reframe for you as a coach. Imagine how different our conversations would be if we replaced certainty with curiosity. Instead of saying they're wrong, what if we asked, help me understand how you got here? Instead of saying, that doesn't make any sense, what if we asked, tell me about your experience? Instead of trying to prove our point, what if we tried to understand theirs? One of the probably most healthiest phrases that you can ever say to another person is, help me understand. Not because you'll always agree, but because understanding builds bridges. Judgment builds walls. And curiosity opens doors that criticism never will. So now I want to be very clear about something, and that is understanding someone's story does not mean excusing harmful behavior. It does not mean tolerating abuse, and it does not mean abandoning your boundaries. There are people who have experienced some tremendous pain in their life and have chose to heal. I was one of those. But there are also others who have experienced tremendous amount of pain and refuse to heal. And unfortunately, they unintentionally pass that pain on to everyone around them. Understanding where behavior comes from doesn't mean we accept behavior that causes harm. Healthy boundaries still matter, accountability still matters, safety still matters. But when we can understand the story behind the behavior, we stop reducing people to their behavior alone. We begin recognizing that behavior is often the symptom, not the entire story. One of the phrases that you'll hear me say throughout my podcast is that every behavior tells a story. And our job isn't to excuse the behavior. Our job is to become curious enough to understand the story behind it. Because when we understand the story, we start to understand the behavior. And when we start to understand the behavior, this is where the healing begins. Imagine what happens when you begin looking at people this way, okay? Instead of asking, what's wrong with them? You begin asking, what happened to them? Instead of labeling someone as difficult, you become curious about what they've had to survive. Instead of assuming someone is cold, you lean in and wonder what emotional safety felt like for them and if they ever learned it. Instead of seeing someone as controlling, you wonder if chaos taught them that control was the only way to feel safe. Again, this doesn't mean every behavior is healthy, but it reminds us that every person is carrying a story that we don't see. Just like you are, just like I am. And when we become curious about someone else's lens, something incredible happens. Our compassion grows, our empathy deepens, our relationships become stronger, and perhaps most importantly, we become more compassionate with ourselves because we begin to realize the lens that we've been looking through wasn't something that we consciously chose. It was something life was slowly building, and if life helped build that lens, healing can help reshape it. That's the most beautiful part, guys. You're not stuck seeing the world the same way forever. As you heal, your lens changes. And as your lens change, your relationships change. And as your relationships change, your life begins to heal and change. So before we finish up today, I want to share one more thought that I believe is incredibly important. Because one of the things that I see most often in the work that I do is how quickly our mind takes one experience and turns it into a lifelong belief. Someone who has one unhealthy relationship suddenly thinks, I can't trust anyone. Someone gets rejected once and it becomes, I'm not good enough. Someone fails or falls short at something and it turns into, I'll never be successful. Our mind is always looking for patterns. The problem is sometimes we create these patterns from experiences that were never meant to define our entire future, okay? I see this all the time with coaching and even therapy. Someone has one negative experience with a therapist or one disappointing experience with a coach, and they leave believing therapy doesn't work for me. Coaching is a waste of time. They're all the same. But think about that for a moment. Would you ever say that every doctor is the same because one doctor wasn't a right fit for you? I can tell you right now, I had one doctor that misdiagnosed my oldest son with anxiety when he had a brain tumor and he was having focal seizures. So do I say that every doctor is horrible because this one doctor wasn't a right fit and missed something? Absolutely not. Would you stop eating at every restaurant because one meal wasn't good? Would you decide that every teacher is insufficient because one teacher didn't help you learn? Of course not. So why do we do that with healing? The truth is, not every therapist is the same. Not every coach is the same. Not every healing modality is the same. Every professional brings a different education, a different philosophy, a different life experience, and a different way of helping people. I can only speak for myself here. And one of the things that I am most passionate about is continuing to learn, grow, and challenge my own way of thinking. I am consistently taking classes, continuing to expand my education so I can be the best coach for my clients. I never want to become someone who believes that there is only one right answer and only one way to help people. Anyone who has worked with me in the past several years has seen how much I've expanded, how I work with my clients, what I use to help my clients. There's just not one right way. It's not an always or a never, which is why when I have discovery calls with clients, it's about them getting a feeling for me and me getting a feeling for them because I'm not meant to work with all people. Not everyone is my ideal client, and that's okay. Okay? So I've had conversations with therapists, coaches, and other professionals where we have really challenged one another's perspectives. And we've all walked away seeing something that we hadn't considered before. I was talking to a young lady a couple weeks ago, And she was explaining something to me, and I was giving her a reframe on how to look at that experience. And she said to me, Christian, in my 10 years of talk therapy, no one has ever explained it to me this way. But now I understand. That doesn't mean that her talk therapist wasn't right or was wrong. It just means that I brought a different perspective. My language resonated with her. So as we go through life and we're challenging each other's perspectives, it's not because one of us is right or the other's wrong. It's because when we stay open to learning, we grow. And that's exactly the kind of coach that I strive to be. I'm not someone with tunnel vision. I am someone who sees the big picture and who digs to the root. I am someone who is willing to ask, what else could be true here? Because every person sitting across from me has a unique story. The same is true for healing itself. I have met so many people who quietly believe that they are beyond healing. They tell themselves, my trauma is too severe. I've tried therapy. Nothing ever changes. I've already done the work. And what I'll touch on is this last one. I've already done the work. A lot of people think that they've done the work, but what they've done is surface level healing. And in return, they avoid stepping into any situations that might trigger them. So they avoid the triggers. And the reason for this is that they truly haven't healed the root. And that doesn't mean that you haven't healed a little bit, but just staying open to this perspective that just because you've done some work doesn't mean that there's not more to the root that needs to be healed. Because healing is an everyday thing. Just like if you want to lose weight and you really work at it for 4 months and you get the outcome that you want. If you stop doing what you were doing to get you here, guess what? That weight comes back on. The same goes with healing. It's an everyday mindset shift and utilizing the healing modalities that actually heal the root, not just surface level healing. So what I gently invite you to consider is this. What if it wasn't that healing wasn't possible? What if you simply haven't found the approach that speaks to your nervous system, your personality, your experiences, your unique story? Healing is not a one-size-fits-all, guys. What transforms one person's life may do very little for someone else. Some heal through actual talk therapy. Others heal through somatic work, through coaching, clinical hypnotherapy, EMDR, internal family systems, faith, journaling, meditation, breath work, support groups, combination of all of these approaches. The goal isn't to find the best modality. The goal is to find what helps you as an individual move forward. If you have been carrying that belief that you're too broken, you're too damaged, or that healing just simply isn't possible for you, I want to lovingly challenge that belief. Please don't let one experience become your entire truth. Stay curious, stay open, because sometimes healing begins the moment that we stop asking, why didn't this work? And we start asking, what haven't I tried yet? Who haven't I worked with that might be a better option? Would Coach Christian be a good coach because I resonate with what she's saying? Or perhaps even more importantly, what am I finally ready to be open to? You may be one conversation, one coach, one breakthrough, one new perspective away from seeing your life through an entirely different lens. And sometimes that's all it takes for everything to start changing and healing, guys. So if there's one thing that I hope that you will take away from today's episode, it's this: that you don't have to agree with every perspective that you encounter. You don't have to abandon your values, and you certainly don't ignore your intuition. But I hope that you'll remain curious enough to recognize that your perspective is only one way of seeing the world. Because every person that you meet has lived a life that you haven't. They've experienced things that you haven't experienced. They've celebrated victories that you've never experienced or will ever fully understand. They've carried wounds from being from different cultures that you've never walked through, you've never had to see, you've never had to experience. And every one of those experiences has shaped the lens through which they view their life, just like yours has shaped you. The goal isn't to decide whose lens is right. The goal is to become more aware that we're all looking through different lenses, because awareness changes everything. When you become aware of your lens, you stop assuming your perspective is the only truth. You begin asking better questions. You become slower to judge, quicker to listen, more willing to learn. And that's where real growth begins. Not because the world suddenly changes, but because you're finally willing to see it differently. So I'm going to leave you with two, not just one, but two Ashes to Awakening reflection questions for this week. So question number 1 is, where in my life might I be looking through a lens created by my past experiences rather than seeing the situation as it truly is? And as you reflect, notice where your assumptions may be shaping your reality. Instead, ask yourself, what else could be true here? Sometimes awareness doesn't come from finding a new answer. Sometimes it comes from asking a better question. And question number 2 is, who in my life might I understand differently if I became curious about the experiences that shaped their perspective instead of viewing them only through my lens? Is there someone that you've dismissed, judged, that you've disagreed with? Or someone whose behavior simply just doesn't make sense to you? Instead of asking what's wrong with them, just try asking what experiences might have shaped the lens through which they see the world. You may not agree with every decision they make. You may not approve with every behavior. And you certainly don't have to tolerate behavior that is harmful or unhealthy. But understanding someone's story doesn't require an agreement. Sometimes the greatest act of healing isn't changing someone else's mind. It's expanding your own perspective enough to recognize that every person is living from a different story. And every story is viewed through a different lens. So if today's episode resonated with you, I encourage you to download the reflection worksheet and this week's weekly awareness challenge. That's in the show notes, the links are. They're designed to help you move beyond simply just listening to me and begin applying what you've learned in your own life. Because awareness without action is just information. But awareness followed by intentional action creates transformation. So if today's conversation encouraged you to see yourself or someone else in a new way, I invite you to subscribe to Ashes to Awakening podcast. Season 1, The Origin of You, is about to wrap up. Starting next week, August 3rd, we will be moving into Season 2, which is the 8 stages of behavior development. And we're going to be talking about where your emotional foundation was built and where it may have been interrupted. So we will begin digging into one stage every week, and I will be teaching things around the behavior stage itself, when it develops, what happens when needs aren't met, and what adult behaviors are a result of that. In the next coming seasons, I have 10 seasons already planned out for you guys with 8 episodes per season. We are going to continue uncovering hidden beliefs, emotional patterns, protective behaviors, and subconscious programming that quietly shapes the way that you think, you feel, and you respond every day. The more you understand the story that shaped you, the more empowered you become to rewrite a different one. So thank you for allowing me to be part of your healing journey today. And until next time, remember, every behavior tells a story. Our job is not to judge the behavior. It's to become curious enough to understand the story behind it. And when we understand the story, we begin to understand the behavior. And when we begin to understand the behavior, that's where healing begins. So keep becoming curious. Keep choosing awareness and keep moving from the ashes to awakening. Until next time.